Hey everyone, this is Jungkook. Before we start, I want to know where you're listening from. Drop your country in the comments below. It always amazes me to see how people from so many corners of the world can connect with a single story. And today, I have something to share that I never imagined I would be saying out loud. Something that shook me not just as an artist, not just as someone in the public eye, but as a man, as a human being, facing one of the most vulnerable and transforming moments of my life. The words were simple, just 2 words, actually. But they carried a weight heavier than any stage I've ever stood on, heavier than any spotlight I've ever faced. She looked at me, her eyes trembling with both fear and certainty, and she said, "Impregnate." I don't think my brain even processed the meaning in that very instant. It was like the world had stopped, as if time itself had folded in on me. My chest tightened, my throat went dry, and for the first time in years, I felt like I had absolutely no idea what to say. You might think, given the kind of life I live, that I've been through countless moments of pressure. Stages in front of millions, cameras flashing in every direction, endless rehearsals, interviews where every word is scrutinized, and yet none of that compared to this single moment. Because what she said wasn't just about her, it was about me, about us, about a future that I wasn't sure I was ready to hold. Before I take you into that moment, let me go back a little, because you need to understand where my heart was before those words came crashing into my life. For years, my focus was singular. Music, performance, army, I thought that was enough. I believed that if I kept pushing myself to new limits, if I perfected every note, every movement, every emotion on stage, I would fill whatever emptiness I sometimes felt when the lights went off. And to a certain extent, it worked. The applause, the love, the connection with fans, it gave me purpose, it gave me fire. But when I went home at night, after tours, after long days in the studio, the silence was deafening. Imagine being surrounded by sound all day, voices, cheers, music vibrating in your chest. And then suddenly it all stops. You close the door of your room and all you can hear is your own breathing. That's when the doubts creep in. That's when you ask yourself, is this really all there is? Success, recognition, fame, but who really knows me when the world is quiet? That question haunted me more than I admitted to anyone. Yes, I smiled on stage. I gave everything I had in every performance. But behind those smiles, there were nights when I felt like I was disappearing into my own ambition. Nights when I wondered what kind of man I was becoming. Not just as an artist, but as a person. And whether I was capable of building something real, something lasting outside of the music. That's when she entered my life. Not in some dramatic, cinematic way, but in the most ordinary of moments. A quiet evening, a conversation that felt surprisingly easy, laughter that didn't feel rehearsed. She wasn't impressed by Jungkook, the singer, the idol. She saw me as a person, not as a projection. And that was refreshing in a way I didn't even know I needed. We talked for hours about everything, books, films, little details about life. She noticed things I didn't even realize about myself, like the way I fidget when I'm nervous, or how I tend to go quiet when I'm thinking deeply. She wasn't afraid of the silences either. She let them breathe, as if she understood that sometimes the best conversations happen in what isn't said. Slowly, without me even realizing it, she became someone I looked forward to seeing. Someone who reminded me of the parts of myself I had neglected, the boy who once dreamed in quiet rooms before the world became so loud. Someone who made me think not just about the next performance, but about the next morning, the next meal, the next ordinary day. But let's be honest, love, or whatever you want to call it, is complicated when your life is under a microscope. Every step, every glance, every rumor can spiral into a headline. That pressure can suffocate even the most promising connection. So I kept things private, close to my chest, guarded in a way that was probably frustrating for her sometimes. I didn't want her to be dragged into a storm she never asked for. And yet, despite all that, she stayed. She stayed through my long rehearsals, my unpredictable schedule, my tendency to disappear into music. She stayed when I was too tired to talk, too drained to give anything but silence. She stayed because she saw something worth staying for, even when I couldn't see it myself. Then came that night, a night that started like any other. We had dinner together, nothing extravagant, just simple food, laughter, the kind of comfort you don't realize you've been craving until it's right in front of you. I remember thinking how rare it was to feel that calm, that unforced. And then she went quiet. I noticed the shift immediately. Her hands tightened around her glass, her breathing uneven. I asked if something was wrong, and she just looked at me. And then she said it. Those words that rearranged everything inside me. Impregnant. In that moment, my first instinct wasn't joy or fear. It was disbelief. Not because I doubted her, but because I doubted myself. Could I be a father? Could I be someone strong enough, present enough, loving enough to raise a child in the middle of this chaotic life? My mind flooded with every insecurity I had buried under layers of ambition. What if I wasn't ready? What if I ruined everything? She watched me carefully, probably searching for any sign of what I was feeling. I wish I could tell you. I immediately said the perfect thing, that I reached across the table, held her hand, and promised her the world. But the truth is, I froze. I sat there, my chest pounding, my throat dry, staring at her as if she had just told me the universe was collapsing. And in a way, it had not collapsing into destruction, but collapsing into rebirth. Everything I thought I knew about my future, every plan, every idea of what came next, suddenly dissolved. All that remained was this new reality, this tiny, invisible life already changing me before it even began. That's why I said my world changed, because in that moment I realized something I had never truly faced before. Life doesn't wait for you to be ready. It doesn't ask for your permission. It just happens. And you either step into it with courage or you let fear consume you. That night, I barely slept. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying those words in my head over and over again. Impregnant. Each time they echoed, they felt heavier, more real. My mind ran through everything, my career, my family, my fans, the media, the expectations, the judgment. But underneath all that noise, there was a quieter voice. A voice that asked, what kind of man do you want to be now? And that question is where everything truly began to change. I lay there in the darkness, my heart pounding in a rhythm that felt too fast, too uncertain. The ceiling above me looked endless, a canvas of shadows shifting with the faint city lights leaking through the curtains. Sleep didn't come to me that night, not even for a moment. Every time I closed my eyes, I heard her voice again, the weight of her words pressing against my chest like gravity itself. I'm pregnant. Those two words refused to loosen their grip on me. They weren't just words, they were a mirror, reflecting back every fear, every hope, every unresolved question I had buried for years. I tried to calm myself by focusing on my breathing. Inhale, exhale. But with every breath, new questions rose up. Would I be a good father? Could I even be one at all? My life had always been defined by discipline, by training, by goals that stretched beyond human limits. I had trained my body, my voice, my mind, all to stand on stages and deliver perfection. But no amount of rehearsals had ever prepared me for this. There's no choreography for fatherhood, no script to memorize, no guaranteed applause at the end of each day. There's only raw, imperfect life. And that terrified me. I thought back to my own parents, how they raised me, the sacrifices they made, the love they poured into me, even when I didn't understand it. They weren't perfect, but they were present. They stood by me through my stubborn phases, through my relentless practice hours, through the moments when I doubted myself. Would I have that kind of patience? Could I balance the demands of my career with the demands of a child who didn't care about fame or awards, only about whether I was there, whether I was listening, whether I cared? The sun rose slowly that morning, the light spilling into the room like a quiet reminder that the world doesn't stop for personal crises. My body was heavy with exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. I picked up my phone, scrolled aimlessly through messages, but none of them mattered. Not the schedules, not the updates, not even the encouraging words from friends. For the first time, my career felt small compared to the magnitude of what lay ahead. I knew I couldn't avoid the conversation. I couldn't leave her waiting. Couldn't let her sit in silence, wondering what I thought, what I felt, whether I was going to run from this or face it with her. My fear screamed at me to delay, to hide, to find excuses. But beneath that fear was something else, a quiet determination that surprised me. I didn't want to run. I wanted to understand. I wanted to try. Later that day, I asked her if we could meet again. Not in public, not in a place filled with noise and distractions, just somewhere private where we could speak honestly. She agreed. When she walked into the room, my heart clenched. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the uncertainty in her eyes. She was brave, braver than me in that moment, because she had spoken her truth out loud and now she was waiting for me to face it. We sat across from each other, the silence thick but not empty. I finally spoke, my voice lower than I intended. I didn't sleep last night. She nodded, as if she had expected that. Neither did I, she admitted softly. There were so many things I wanted to say, but the words tangled in my throat. So I started with the only truth I could grasp. I'm scared. Her eyes softened. Me too. That exchange, those two sentences, felt like a lifeline. For the first time since she said those words, I realized I wasn't carrying this alone. She was right there with me, terrified too, uncertain too, yet still present. We talked for hours, not about the surface details, but about the deep fears, the hidden doubts, the questions that claw at you when nobody else is listening. I told her about my fear of being absent, of letting a child grow up, feeling like their father was always somewhere else, always chasing something bigger. I confessed that I didn't know how to balance the life I had built with the life that was suddenly demanding to be built inside hers. She listened. She didn't judge, didn't interrupt, didn't tell me to stop being afraid. Instead, she shared her own fears, the fear of being judged, of being thrust into a world she hadn't asked for, of raising a child in the shadow of cameras and headlines. She admitted she was scared of my silence, of not knowing what my heart would decide. And then she said something that struck me deeply. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to choose not to walk away. Those words stayed with me. In a world where everything demands certainty, where success is measured in clear goals and flawless execution, she was reminding me that life doesn't work that way. Love doesn't work that way. Parenthood doesn't work that way. It isn't about knowing every step before you take it. It's about showing up even when you're afraid, especially when you're afraid. I realized then that maybe this moment wasn't just about the future child. Maybe it was also about me, about who I wanted to become as a man. For so long, my identity had been wrapped around performance, achievement, the relentless pursuit of perfection. But life was asking me a different question now. Could I be imperfect, vulnerable, open? Could I be present not just on stage, but in the quiet, messy, beautiful chaos of daily life? As the hours passed, something inside me shifted. The fear didn't disappear, but it was joined by something else, hope. A fragile hope that maybe this wasn't the end of who I was, but the beginning of someone I was meant to become. That evening, when I finally walked her home, I felt a strange peace settling over me. Not because everything was resolved, but because we had chosen to face it together. I wasn't ready yet. Maybe I wouldn't ever feel fully ready, but I knew I wanted to try. That night, I wrote in my journal a habit I had let slip over the years. I wrote down the words she had said. We don't have to have all the answers right now. We just have to choose not to walk away. I read them again and again until they sank deep into me. For the first time, I understood that this journey wasn't about being perfect. It was about being willing. And so, part of me began to shift, even if only slightly. I was no longer asking, can I do this? But instead, how will I learn to do this? That question opened a door I hadn't dared to touch before. A door that led not to certainty, but to growth. The following days blurred together in a strange haze. Outwardly, my life didn't change. I still woke up to the same routines: vocal warm-ups, practice schedules, rehearsals, meetings. Cameras still followed me. Managers still handed me plans. Stylists still fitted me into clothes that made me look like the version of Jungkook the world expected to see. But inside, everything was different. Inside, every sound seemed muted compared to those two words still echoing in my mind. I'm pregnant. They lived under my skin like a heartbeat, sometimes making me anxious, sometimes making me strangely calm, but they never left. And as I moved through each day, I began to notice how that reality colored every interaction, every choice, every silence. When I spoke to my parents on the phone, I caught myself almost saying it. I wondered how they would react. Would they be proud? Would they be disappointed? Would they see me as reckless, unprepared, too young to carry such a responsibility, even though the world constantly reminds me I've already lived lifetimes in my 20-something years? Or would they smile softly, the way parents do, and tell me that no one ever feels ready, but love makes you grow into readiness? I thought about my brother too. How would he look at me if he knew? Would he joke about it, or would he sit quietly, offering the kind of support that only siblings can give? The truth is, I didn't know, and that uncertainty was suffocating. But even more than family, my mind kept circling back to Army, to the millions of people who had given me everything: love, devotion, belief. How would they react if they knew? Some would celebrate, I was sure. They would write messages of congratulations, flood timelines with joy. But others might feel betrayed, as if I had given my heart elsewhere when they believed it belonged to them. Some might question whether I could still be the same Jungkook for them, whether fatherhood would take me away, dim the light I pour into the stage. I imagined headlines, rumors, endless speculation. I imagined the cold glare of judgment, not just toward me, but toward her, the woman carrying this new life. Would she become a target? Would people pick apart her every gesture, her every word, her every silence? That thought chilled me more than anything. I had chosen this life, but she hadn't, and neither had the child. For days, I wrestled with the question, do I keep this hidden, or do I bring it into the light? The idea of hiding felt safe in the short term. If nobody knew, nobody could judge, nobody could attack. We could protect the fragile beginning of this journey, shield it from the chaos of public eyes. But secrecy has its own price. It builds walls, it creates distance, it eats at the trust between you and the people who believe in you. On the other hand, telling the truth meant opening the floodgates. Once spoken, it could never be taken back. Once the world knew, they would never stop talking, analyzing, twisting, magnifying. I had seen how quickly narratives spread, how little control I would have over my own story once it escaped my lips. Was I strong enough for that? Was she strong enough? Was the love we were building strong enough to withstand that storm? I remember sitting in the practice room one night, long after everyone else had left. The mirrors reflected me back, sweat clinging to my skin, hair messy, eyes tired. But what struck me most was how empty I looked. For years, those reflections had been my anchor, the place I measured my progress, my discipline, my strength. But that night, the reflection looked lost. And I realized why. Because for the first time, I wasn't just training for myself. I wasn't just pushing to prove I could be the best performer. There was another life waiting, a life that would one day look at me and call me father. That word carried more weight than any award, any chart, any title. It scared me, but it also demanded something deeper from me than I had ever demanded of myself. In that quiet practice room, I asked myself a question I had avoided since the moment she told me, who do I want to become? Not who do I want the world to see, not who do I want Army to admire, but who do I truly want to be when the lights are off, when the cameras are gone, when it's just me and a small, fragile voice calling my name? The answer didn't come quickly. It came slowly, in fragments, through memories of my parents' sacrifices, through the softness of her eyes when she said, we just have to choose not to walk away, through the ache in my chest that told me this fear was proof of how much I cared. That week, I met her again. We sat by the river, away from the noise of the city. The water shimmered in the fading light, and for a moment, it felt like the world had given us a pocket of peace. She held her hands together tightly, and I knew she was waiting to see if I would speak, if I would step forward into this new reality. I keep thinking about Army, I admitted, my voice barely above the sound of the water. About my family, about how the world will see this. She looked at me, her gaze steady, almost unflinching. And what about how you see it? Her question pierced me. I had been so consumed with how others would react that I had forgotten to ask myself what I truly wanted, what I truly felt. For a long moment, I couldn't answer. And then, quietly, I said, I'm scared, but I don't want to run away. She reached for my hand. That's enough for now. We'll figure out the rest together. In that moment, I realized something profound. The storm outside might be inevitable, family questions, fans' reactions, media scrutiny. But the calm within us, the choice to stand together, was stronger than all of that. And maybe, just maybe, the world didn't need to understand right away. Maybe the first step wasn't announcing it to millions or hiding it in silence. Maybe the first step was simply holding your hand and saying, I'm here. That was the beginning of acceptance. Not of answers, not of perfect plans, but of presence. And presence, I was starting to understand, might be the most powerful promise I could make. The days after that riverside conversation felt strangely heavier, as though the air itself carried a weight I hadn't noticed before. Everything looked the same, the skyline, the rehearsal rooms, the long corridors of the company building, but I was no longer moving through them as the same person. I carried something invisible now, a truth only two of us knew, and it shaped the way I saw everything. When I stood on stage during rehearsals, I no longer thought only of whether my voice was steady or whether my timing was sharp. Instead, my thoughts drifted. Would I still be here giving this much when there was a small child at home waiting for me? Would I still belong fully to music, or would I be divided in ways I couldn't predict? Timing's such a simple word, yet it cut through me like a blade. My whole life had been dictated by timing. Training schedules, comeback deadlines, tours, interviews, contracts, everything was planned down to the second. And now, here I was, facing something that refused to be scheduled, something raw and uncontrollable, something that simply arrived when it wanted, regardless of my readiness. I thought often about marriage. It was something I had carried in my heart quietly, not as a fixed plan, but as a possibility I knew would come one day. I imagined it happening after the chaos settled a little, when I felt older, more stable, when the world wasn't demanding every piece of me at once. I thought it would happen when I was ready to share it openly, with the blessing of army, with my family standing proudly beside me. But reality had decided otherwise. Now I was standing on the edge of fatherhood without even knowing when or how marriage would enter the picture. That contradiction gnawed at me. Society has its expectations. Fans have theirs. Family has theirs. People like to see things in a certain order. First love, then marriage, then children. Neat, predictable, acceptable. But life, I was learning, didn't care about order. Life moved in its own rhythm, sometimes rushing ahead before your heart could catch up. The thought of public reaction haunted me. I knew there would be whispers, criticism, disappointment from those who had built an image of me in their hearts that didn't allow for mistakes or deviations. I could already hear the voices, too soon, irresponsible. What about his career? The world often forgets that beneath the spotlight, there is simply a man, flawed, uncertain, trying to navigate life like anyone else. But the fear wasn't only about public reaction, it was also about my own sense of readiness. Would I be enough? Not as Jungkook, the performer, but as Jungkook, the man. Could I hold both worlds together, the world of music, stages, and millions of eyes, and the world of quiet nights, crying infants, and the unglamorous patience of parenthood? I kept replaying moments from my childhood in my mind. I remembered my parents working tirelessly, the way my mother's hands never seemed to rest, the way my father's voice carried both firmness and warmth. They didn't have everything figured out either, but they showed up every day. And maybe that was what mattered most. Not perfection, not flawless timing, but presence. One evening, I found myself back at the studio, not to practice, but to escape. I sat at the piano, my fingers brushing keys I hadn't touched in months. A simple melody emerged, hesitant at first, then stronger, carrying pieces of my fear, my hope, my confusion. Music has always been my language when words fail me. And in that quiet room, I poured everything into the notes. Each chord was a question. Am I ready? Can I do this? Will love be enough to hold everything together? She came to meet me later that night. I didn't tell her where I was, but somehow she knew to come. She sat beside me, listening to the melody without speaking. And when the music stopped, she whispered, "You don't have to have everything figured out, Jungkook. You just have to be here." Her words echoed what she had said before, but this time they sank deeper. Because presence, I realized, wasn't just about being physically near. It was about choosing to stand in the chaos, choosing to hold steady even when the ground beneath you trembles. I told her then about my fears of timing, about the marriage plans that hadn't yet taken shape, about the pressure I felt to present life in the right order. She looked at me with eyes full of calm and said, "Our life doesn't have to look like everyone else's. It just has to be ours." Those words broke something in me, broke the chains of comparison, of societal order, of expectations I'd carried unknowingly on my shoulders. Our life didn't need to mirror anyone else's timeline. It needed to reflect our truth, our choices, our values. And yet, even with that comfort, I couldn't fully silence the questions inside me. What about the music? What about the fans who saw me as theirs? What about the company that invested so much in the image of Jungkook? Would they understand that behind the idol was a man whose life had just taken a turn he hadn't planned? That night, after she left, I wrote another line in my journal. Maybe timing isn't something to control, but something to surrender to. The thought scared me, but it also gave me peace. Because surrender didn't mean giving up. It meant trusting that life knows when to unfold, even if it doesn't match your plans. It meant allowing myself to grow into a role I hadn't chosen in this moment, but one that might shape me more deeply than any stage ever could. I still didn't know when marriage would come, or how I would balance the demands of fatherhood with the world that never stops asking for more of me. But I began to realize that maybe readiness isn't about perfect timing. Maybe it's about choosing to walk forward, step by uncertain step, with love as your compass. The mind is a strange place. Once an idea takes root, it starts to grow in ways you can't control. After she said those words, "I'm pregnant," the thought of fatherhood kept sprouting in me, like seeds carried on the wind. At first, those seeds felt heavy, like weights pressing on my chest. But slowly, something else began to happen. Alongside the fear, small visions started to bloom. I would catch myself daydreaming at odd times, in the middle of rehearsal, while tying my shoes, or even during quiet moments before stepping onto a stage. My mind would drift. I would see myself holding a tiny hand, fragile and warm, gripping my finger with surprising strength. I would imagine a small voice calling my name, not Jungkook, not idol, not singer, but something simpler, something more profound. Appa, father. The thought sent shivers through me. Could I really be that person? Could I be the anchor for someone's entire world? Could I protect them from the chaos of fame, from the noise that never stops following me, from the harshness of a world that loves to build people up and tear them down? Fear still lived inside me, but it was slowly being joined by wonder. I imagined what their laugh might sound like. Would it be soft like hers, or full of mischief like mine as a child? I imagined their first steps, the wobble, the stumble, the determination in their little eyes. I imagined teaching them things, not just how to sing or dance, but how to face life, how to be kind, how to stand tall, even when the world tries to bend you. At night, when I lay in bed, I would sometimes place my hand on my chest and wonder what it would feel like to place it instead on her stomach, to know there was life growing there, half of me and half of her. The thought both terrified me and filled me with a tenderness I didn't know I was capable of. But then came the darker visions, the nights when my mind twisted those dreams into fears. What if I wasn't enough? What if I failed? What if the child grew up resenting me for the absences, the headlines, the weight of being connected to someone the world refuses to leave alone? I thought of my flaws, my impatience, my tendency to disappear into work until I forget the world outside. Would those flaws hurt them? Would I become the kind of father who is present in body but absent in soul? These questions haunted me. I would look in the mirror and ask myself, do you even know how to be a man outside of music? Do you know how to love without conditions, without performance, without applause? One evening, I shared these fears with her. I told her about the visions, the dreams, and the nightmares. The way hope and fear wrestled inside me like two wild animals. She listened, as she always did, with patience and calm. And then she said something I will never forget. Perfection isn't what children need. They need presence. They need love, even when it's messy, even when it's flawed. They don't remember every detail of what you give them. They remember how you made them feel. If you can make them feel safe, if you can make them feel loved, that will be enough. Her words hit me harder than any criticism I had ever received, harder than any doubt I'd thrown at myself, because she was right. I had been thinking about fatherhood as another performance, another role I had to master, another expectation I couldn't afford to fail. But fatherhood, like love, wasn't about perfection. It was about showing up, again and again. Even when tired, even when scared, even when unsure. That night, I dreamed for the first time not of concerts, not of awards, not of headlines, but of a small child running toward me, their laughter echoing in the air, their arms outstretched. In the dream, I bent down and scooped them up, and as they wrapped their arms around my neck, I felt something shift deep inside me. A sense of purpose that was different from music, different from fame. A purpose rooted in connection, in blood, in love, that asked nothing but everything at once. When I woke up, my eyes were wet with tears, not of sadness, but of something deeper acceptance. The idea of fatherhood no longer felt like an invasion into my life. It felt like a calling, one I hadn't expected, but one I couldn't ignore. Still, I knew the path wouldn't be easy. The world would have its opinions, my career would feel the weight of change, and my own doubts would never fully disappear. But alongside all of that, hope had found a foothold in me. And that hope was enough to keep me walking forward, even if the road was uncertain. That morning, I wrote in my journal again, maybe love isn't about being ready. Maybe love is about becoming ready through the act of loving. And with that thought, the fear loosened its grip just a little. For the first time, I didn't just see fatherhood as a burden or a challenge. I saw it as a gift that would demand everything of me, but would give me more than I could ever imagine in return. There comes a point when silence becomes louder than any noise. That's what I began to feel in the weeks that followed. Outwardly, nothing had changed. The stage lights still blazed, the fans still screamed, the music still pulsed through my veins. But underneath it all, there was a second heartbeat, an invisible rhythm shaping everything I did. I couldn't separate myself from it anymore. I started noticing the gap between what the world expected from me and what I was secretly carrying. To ARMY, I was still Jungkook, the golden maknae, the performer who gave every ounce of himself on stage. To the company, I was still an artist whose career needed to be protected and planned meticulously. But inside, I was something else entirely. I was a man preparing for a responsibility bigger than any spotlight. The question pressed against me day and night. How will I balance this? Music has always been my anchor. Every drop of sweat, every late night in the studio, every sacrifice of normal life, it was all for this dream. And ARMY has always been my family. The ones who gave me strength when I had none left. Who carried me further than I could have walked alone. To imagine even the slightest distance between us felt unbearable. But I knew that once this truth came out, things would never be the same. I pictured the headlines, the endless speculation, the whispers turning into storms. I could already see the arguments online, some defending me, some condemning me, some claiming to know my life better than I did. That's what fame does. It gives you love in abundance, but it also strips away the privacy of your most fragile moments. And this was as fragile as it got. But hiding had its own costs. Every time I looked out into the sea of ARMY bombs, every time I sang lyrics about honesty, love, and trust, a part of me ached. Because wasn't I building a wall by keeping this secret? Wasn't I betraying the very bond that had sustained me all these years? The weight of that contradiction was unbearable. On one side, the instinct to protect her, to protect the child, to protect the tiny bubble of peace we had built. On the other, the instinct to honor ARMY with truth, no matter how messy, no matter how complicated. I began to understand that balance didn't mean keeping both worlds separate. Balance meant learning how to let them coexist, even if imperfectly. It meant accepting that my identity as Jungkook the artist and Jungkook the man were not enemies, but parts of the same whole. One night, I stood on stage during a rehearsal for a concert. The stadium was empty except for a few staff members, but I imagined it filled with ARMY. I closed my eyes and let the silence speak. I imagined what it would feel like to stand here and tell them the truth, that I was about to become a father, that I was terrified and unprepared, but also grateful and determined. I imagined their faces, their tears, their anger, their joy. I let myself feel all of it, and it nearly broke me. Later that night, I shared these thoughts with her. I told her how much ARMY meant to me, how torn I felt between protecting our private life and honoring the connection I had with fans. She held my hand and said, "You don't owe the world every piece of yourself. You just owe them your truth when you're ready to give it. Her words were gentle, but they cut deep. Because she was right. For so long, I had believed that every secret was a betrayal, that every silence was a failure. But maybe silence can also be sacred. Maybe waiting until the right moment isn't dishonesty, it's protection. Protection of something too new, too delicate, to survive the glare of millions of eyes. That night, I wrote again in my journal. The words came slowly, but they carried clarity I hadn't felt in weeks. Balance isn't about giving everyone everything. Balance is about giving what matters, when it matters, in the way that matters most. I didn't have all the answers yet. I didn't know when or how I would share this truth with the world. But I knew I had to learn how to live in both spaces at once, the stage and the home, the spotlight and the quiet room, the performer and the father to be, not by choosing one over the other, but by letting them shape me into someone new. And maybe, just maybe, Army would understand. Not because they owed me their understanding, but because love, real love, isn't about perfection. It's about walking together through the unknown. Telling her was one thing. Carrying it silently between the two of us was another. But telling my family that was a mountain I wasn't sure I could climb. For days, I carried the words in my throat like stones, heavy and immovable. Every time my phone lit up with a message from my mother. Every time my father called to ask how I was doing, I felt the weight grow heavier. They knew me as their son, the boy who had run barefoot through the house, the teenager who left home too young to chase a dream, the man who stood under the blinding lights. How would they see me now? Would they see me as irresponsible, as someone who had allowed life to rush ahead before I was ready? Would they be disappointed that I was stepping into fatherhood before marriage had even been set, before the world even knew? Or would they remind me of the very lessons they had given me about resilience, about love, about the fact that life never arrives in perfect order? The silence between us grew unbearable. I couldn't keep hiding it. So one evening, after rehearsals, I called my mother. I remember staring at the phone screen, my thumb hovering over her contact, as if the name itself carried the power to undo me. My heart raced. My palms were slick with sweat, but I pressed the button, and when her voice came through, warm and familiar, I almost forgot how to breathe. "Son, are you okay? You sound tired." I hesitated, my throat tightening. For a moment, I wanted to hang up, to postpone, to pretend, but I knew this wasn't something I could run from. So I spoke the words that had been burning inside me. "Mom, I need to tell you something big." She was quiet, waiting, and then, with a trembling voice, I said it. "She's pregnant." The silence on the other end felt eternal. I could hear my own breathing, harsh and uneven. My heart pounded so loudly I thought she could hear it too. And then, finally, she spoke. There was no anger in her voice, no disappointment, only surprise, and then a deep sigh that carried a weight of its own. "Jungkook, that's big news." I closed my eyes, bracing myself. "I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know what to do." Her voice softened. "No one is ever ready, son. Not really. When your father and I had you, we didn't know what we were doing either. We just learned day by day. What matters is that you don't run away from it. What matters is that you stand with her and with the child, even when it's hard." Her words broke something inside me. I had expected judgment, maybe disappointment. Instead, I was met with something else, understanding. She wasn't telling me it would be easy. She wasn't sugarcoating it, but she was telling me that it was possible, that love, commitment, and presence could carry us through. When I told my father later, the conversation was shorter, but no less powerful. He listened in silence, then said, "A man becomes who he is in moments like this. Not on stages, not in front of cameras, but in how he chooses to stand when life demands more from him than he thinks he has." Those words lingered with me long after the call ended. They weren't poetic, they weren't wrapped in comfort, but they were true. Telling my brother was different. He laughed at first, half in disbelief, half in nervous excitement. "You? A dad?" he said, shaking his head. "That's crazy, but also kind of perfect. You've always been stubborn, but when you care, you give everything. That's what kids need." His words made me laugh through my tears, because maybe he was right. Maybe my stubbornness, the very thing that had pushed me to never give up in music, could also make me the kind of father who refuses to give up on his child. After those conversations, I felt lighter. Not because all my fears were gone, they weren't, but because I no longer carried them alone. My family didn't turn away. They didn't see me as broken or reckless. They saw me as someone standing on the edge of a new beginning, someone who would need their support more than ever. That night, I sat with her again. She asked me how my family had taken the news, and I told her. Relief flooded her face, her shoulders relaxing for the first time in weeks. "So they don't hate me?" she whispered. I shook my head. "They don't hate you. They don't hate this. They're scared like we are, but they believe in us." She leaned into me then, her head resting against my shoulder. In that quiet moment, I realized that family isn't just about blood, it's about presence, about choosing to walk alongside each other, even when the road is uncertain. And maybe, just maybe, if my family could accept this, if they could remind me that no one is ever truly ready, but love makes you grow into readiness, then I could learn to accept it too. For the first time since she said those words, "I'm pregnant," I felt the faint glow of something I hadn't dared to hope for. Courage. Not the kind that shouts or demands recognition, but the quiet kind that steadies your steps when fear tells you to run. Once the first shock faded, once my family's voices had steadied me with their mix of honesty and encouragement, I began to ask myself a new question. Not am I ready, because I already knew the answer to that. Nobody is ever ready. The real question was, what kind of father do I want to become? At night, I would lie awake, not with panic this time, but with images flickering through my mind. I saw myself walking beside a small figure, their hand wrapped tightly around mine. I imagined teaching them how to ride a bike, how to balance, how to get back up after falling. I imagined sitting beside them during school projects, pretending to understand math problems I had long forgotten, laughing when we both got confused. I imagined watching them grow into their own person, with their own quirks, their own dreams, their own struggles. And through it all, I kept hearing the same promise echoing inside me. Be present. Always be present. Music had taught me discipline. Fame had taught me endurance. But love, this new kind of love, was teaching me presence. It was teaching me that showing up again and again, even when tired or overwhelmed, was more powerful than any performance. I began writing letters in a notebook. Letters the child would not read for many years, if ever. Letters filled with thoughts too raw to say out loud. In one, I wrote, "I don't know if I'll be perfect. I know I'll make mistakes. But I promise you this, I will not disappear. I will not hide from you. Even when the world demands everything from me, I will find a way back to you." In another, I wrote, "The world will know your father as someone who sang and danced and stood in bright lights. But I want you to know me as someone who listened, who cared, who held you when you were scared, who laughed with you when life was heavy." Each word felt like a vow, binding me not to an image, but to a responsibility deeper than I had ever carried. I also began to think about values. What would I want to teach this child beyond music, beyond ambition? I thought about kindness, how it had carried me through the darkest nights when strangers' words of support kept me from collapsing. I thought about resilience, how failure had shaped me more than success, how the mistakes had carved me into someone stronger. And I thought about humility, how no matter how far the spotlight stretched, life always reminded me that I was just one human being, flawed and learning. These were the gifts I wanted to pass down. Not fame, not wealth, not recognition, but values, the kind that outlast applause. But even as I dreamed, I wrestled with fear. Would I be too consumed by my career to live out these promises? Would the child grow up seeing me more in newspapers than in the living room? Would they resent the life they were born into, a life tied to cameras and scrutiny? I brought these fears to her one evening as we sat together in the quiet. She placed her hand gently over mine and said, "You don't have to be everything. You just have to be enough. Enough love, enough presence, enough honesty. That's more than what many children ever receive." Her words soothed me because she wasn't asking me to become perfect, to erase my flaws or silence my ambition. She was reminding me that love isn't measured in perfection, but in effort, in showing up even when it's hard. That night, I made silent promises to her, to the child, to myself. I promised that I would not let fear turn me into a shadow. I promised that I would allow fatherhood to shape me, not as an end to my dreams, but as a deeper reason to pursue them. I promised that I would never let fame matter more than family, no matter how tempting the world's applause might be. These promises became my compass, guiding me through the uncertainty. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know how fans or the world would react, but I knew who I wanted to be when I looked into the eyes of my child. And that vision, that fragile but powerful vision, began to give me strength. For the first time, fatherhood no longer felt like something crashing into my life uninvited. It felt like a calling I was slowly growing into. A calling that didn't erase Jungkook the singer, but revealed Jungkook the man. And maybe that was the greatest transformation of all. There is a difference between thinking about fatherhood in abstract terms and truly picturing it as reality. For weeks, I had been circling around the idea, writing letters, making promises, whispering fears into the darkness. But one evening, when the world outside was quiet and I sat alone with nothing but my own thoughts, I allowed myself to imagine it in detail the moment I would first hold my child. The image came to me slowly, like a photograph developing in dim light. I saw a small bundle, fragile and new, cradled in my arms. I imagined the warmth of tiny skin against mine, the weight of a life so light yet so immense. I imagined looking down into eyes that had never seen the world before, eyes searching for comfort, for recognition, for love. And then I realized they would be searching for me. That thought made my chest ache, because in that instant, I knew what it meant. To a newborn, the world is overwhelming, confusing, loud. But the sound of a parent's voice, the touch of a parent's hand, is everything. I would be that voice. I would be that hand. I would be the first line of defense between them and the chaos of existence. I had stood on stages before crowds of tens of thousands, lights burning, cameras capturing every move. I had felt the energy of millions, watching, supporting, expecting. But I knew none of that would compare to the silent weight of one tiny gaze meeting mine for the first time. That was a kind of stage no training could prepare me for. I began to wonder what words I would speak in that moment. Would I cry? Would I laugh? Would I be too stunned to say anything at all? Part of me imagined whispering, "It's me. I'm here. I'll always be here." Another part of me feared that my voice would fail me, that the emotions would spill out too fast, leaving me in silence. But maybe silence would be enough, because love doesn't always need words. Sometimes it only needs presence. As I pictured this moment, something inside me shifted yet again. Up until then, I had been thinking about fatherhood mostly in terms of myself, my fears, my readiness, my balance between career and personal life. But in imagining that first embrace, I realized this wasn't about me at all. It was about them. This child wasn't asking for perfection or fame or achievements. They were simply asking to be held, to be loved, to be protected. And that realization brought me to tears. Not tears of fear this time, but tears of recognition. Recognition that love is simpler and yet greater than I had ever understood. Recognition that my life's purpose was expanding beyond anything I had known before. Still, the fear didn't vanish. I wondered, what if I failed? What if my child grew up feeling distant from me, resenting the spotlight that followed us everywhere? What if I wasn't strong enough to shield them from the cruelty of public judgment? These questions kept me awake at night. But alongside the fear was something stronger, a quiet determination. A voice that whispered, "You don't have to be flawless. You just have to keep choosing to show up." I told her about these thoughts one night. She smiled, her hand brushing mine. "When that moment comes, you'll know what to do," she said, "because love has a way of teaching you instantly." Her words stayed with me. They reminded me that parenthood isn't a skill you master before it begins. It's something you grow into, moment by moment, mistake by mistake, joy by joy. It's not about being ready in advance, it's about becoming ready in real time. And so I began to see that first embrace not as something to fear, but as something to long for. A doorway into a new kind of love, one that would strip away every mask, every stage persona, leaving only the raw, imperfect man beneath. The man I was becoming. When I look back at the night she spoke those words, "I'm pregnant," it feels like a lifetime ago. In reality, it has only been weeks. but those weeks have stretched me, broken me, rebuilt me in ways I never imagined. I entered that night as one version of myself and emerged as another, even if the transformation has only just begun. At first, all I could see was fear, the collapse of plans, the end of certainty, the weight of responsibility pressing against a life already overflowing with demands. I thought my world was ending. But slowly, I realized something far more profound. My world wasn't ending, it was expanding. The silence of those first nights no longer feels suffocating. Instead, it feels like space. Space for something new to take root. Space for me to grow beyond the confines of the image I've carried for so long. For years, I defined myself through achievements, albums, concerts, awards, numbers. But love, this unexpected, unplanned, overwhelming love, has reminded me that the greatest achievements are not measured in charts or trophies. They are measured in presence, in courage, in the way you choose to stand for the people who need you most. I think of Army often. You have been my family in ways the world will never fully understand. You've carried me when I was weak, celebrated me when I was strong, forgiven me when I was flawed. I don't know how you will feel when this truth finally reaches you. Some of you will smile, some will cry, some will struggle to understand. But I hope you know this. My love for you does not shrink, because my love for someone else grows. Love isn't a limited resource. It multiplies, and because of you, I learned how to give it freely, how to trust it, how to let it shape me. I think of my family, the ones who reminded me that no one is ever truly ready for parenthood, but everyone can grow into it. Their voices gave me courage when I thought I had none left. Their acceptance reminded me that life's detours are not failures. They are simply different roads that can lead to something beautiful. And I think of her, the one who looked me in the eye when I froze, when I doubted, when I couldn't find the right words, and reminded me that we don't need all the answers right away, that we just need to choose not to walk away. Her strength has become my anchor. Her belief in me, even when I question myself, has been the light guiding me through this uncertainty. Now, as I stand at the edge of this new chapter, I don't pretend to have mastered anything. I still wake up with questions. I still lie awake with fears. But those fears no longer paralyze me. They sharpen me. They remind me of what is at stake, not just a career, not just an image, but a life, a family, a future. I know the road ahead will not be easy. There will be moments when I fail, when I stumble, when I disappoint. But there will also be moments of laughter, of learning, of joy, so pure it silences every doubt. And those moments will make every challenge worth it. To the child who does not yet know my face, I want to say this. You changed me before you even arrived. You taught me that love can be terrifying and beautiful at the same time. You showed me that life is not about waiting until you feel ready, but about becoming ready through the act of showing up. I promise I will show up for you, always. And to those listening now, wherever you are in the world, maybe you are carrying your own fears, your own unexpected changes, your own moments when life throws you off course. I want you to know this. It's okay to be scared. It's okay to feel unprepared. But don't let fear convince you to run. Stand. Choose to stay. Choose to grow. Because sometimes the things we never planned become the very things that give our lives meaning. She said, I'm pregnant. And yes, my world changed. Not by ending, but by beginning again. The stage will always be a part of me. The music will always flow through my veins. Army will always be my family. But now, there is another rhythm in my life, a heartbeat I cannot yet hear, but one I already feel. And that heartbeat has given me a new purpose. The best is not behind me. The best is not even here yet. The best is waiting in the future, in the quiet moments, in the laughter of a child, in the love that grows stronger every day. This is not the end of my story. This is the start of the most important chapter of all.